The pioneering Argentine intellectual Victoria Ocampo first encountered Count Hermann von Keyserling in 1929 in the Hôtel des Reservoirs, Versailles. It was a moment both of them would struggle to understand for the rest of their lives. Keyserling was born in 1880 and had acquired a following as an erudite aristocrat in exile. After he lost his family estate in the Russian Revolution of 1918, he settled in Germany with his wife, the granddaughter of Otto von Bismarck. They lived there until Keyserling's death in 1946. Keyserling's best-known work, The Travel Diary of a Philosopher, describes his philosophical responses to the places and people he encountered while on the road in Europe and Asia in 1911. In 1920, the Grand Duke Ernst Ludwig von Hessen invited Keyserling to open a school of wisdom at Darmstadt, Germany, to advocate a renewal of spirit in order to regenerate mankind after the calamities of the First World War. Keyserling invited notable thinkers such as Paul Tillich, Hermann Hesse, Richard Wilhelm, and C.G. Jung to address contemporary European problems of spirit by looking to wisdom traditions from other cultures. Victoria Ocampo was a cultural icon both in her native Argentina and in Europe throughout the 20th century. The magazine Sur that she founded in 1931, together with the publishing company Sur 2 years later, acted as a bridge between South American and North American intellectuals and their fellow thinkers in Europe. Born in 1890 to one of the wealthiest Argentine families, Ocampo used her power and her fortune to promote culture on 3 continents, and she was instrumental in publishing in Spanish not only Jung and Keyserling, but also Aldous Huxley, Paul Valéry, Virginia Woolf, Marguerite Yourcenar, Albert Camus, Graham Greene, and many others. She would become the first woman elected to the Argentine Academy of Letters. In 1927, Ocampo initiated an intense exchange of letters with Keyserling, whose work she had read and greatly admired. In January 1929, she arrived in Paris, paid for his room in the Versailles Hotel he had chosen, and tended devotedly to his many demands. But their first encounter proved to be so riddled with misunderstandings that Keyserling turned to Jung, hoping that the analyst might offer analytic interpretations and advice. Later, in spite of their falling out, Ocampo brought Keyserling to South America on a trip that led to his writing South American Meditations. Soon afterwards, she put an end to all contact with him. Ocampo was appalled by the views Keyserling expressed in South American Meditations. She realized that the Count had toured South America as her guest, projecting his European psyche on everything and perceiving almost nothing. He had transcribed anecdotes about Argentina that she had shared with him, and then presented them in the book, distorted beyond recognition as his own insights. And animating the book was what he called the South American Spider-Woman, Keyserling's expression for his negative experiences of Ocampo herself. Jung emphatically advised Keyserling against publishing the book unless he extensively revised it. In spite of Jung's opinion, Keyserling published it in 1932. In 1934, Ocampo would write to Jung requesting a meeting, ostensibly to discuss publishing his book Psychological Types in Spanish. Though she suspected Keyserling and Jung had spoken about her, she hoped to work analytically with Jung. But her meeting with Jung at his Kusnacht house in October turned out to be frustratingly brief. Jung agreed to see her for a few minutes between patients. It was the only time they met face to face. Later, Ocampo published an account of the meeting in the newspaper La Nación of Buenos Aires. Much later, in 1951, Keyserling's widow published posthumously her husband's memoirs, and included chapters on Ocampo and Jung. Both Jung and Ocampo found themselves arguing in print with the persistent ghost of a dead man. As Keyserling's memoirs attested, Keyserling remained fascinated by Ocampo to the end, and felt that in his collision with her he had experienced everything a man could possibly experience, quote-unquote, the whole history of creation. As to Jung, Keyserling described him in the memoirs as not only psychologically, mythologically, and theologically, but humanistically the most educated man of his time. To understand how the encounter in Versailles affected Keyserling's views of both Ocampo and South America, and to see the affinities between the philosopher and the psychoanalyst, it helps to go back to Ocampo's first letters to Keyserling, and to the moment when Keyserling wrote to Jung, asking for help, predicting that Ocampo will be one of the strongest and strangest personalities of the 20th century, the woman who was everything, as Jorge Luis Borges somewhat ironically called her.
Buenos Aires, July 25th, 1927. To Count Hermann Keyserling. Sir, your books, The Travel Diary of a Philosopher and World in the Making, absorb me in such a tyrannical way that it would be difficult for me to be silent about what they mean to me. For my own satisfaction, I will at least tell you that the discovery of your books has given me a joy of such quality and intensity that I have spent several days without relinquishing them, not even in the material sense. I felt the need to have them at hand. I took them with me to the table. I went for walks with a volume under my arm. At the time of this discovery, I was launched in a project that was headed badly and that worried me very much. But your thinking was such an illumination for me, such a warmth, that my worries literally disappeared. In the morning, before being completely awake, I had the feeling of a vague well-being, such as one feels when, on the previous evening, a happy event has filled one. And when awake, I tried to give a name to that contentment. I would find it in one of your pages. As regards your lectures in Argentina in 1929, the president of the German-Argentinian Cultural Institute, together with the Sociedad Amigos del Arte, of which I am presently the vice president, will write you a letter that I hope you will find perfectly clear. You would not have to pay your travel expenses, nor those of your lodging. If you and Countess Keyserling would accept to come to my house and stay there during your time in Buenos Aires, it would make me very happy. My house is at your disposal. I trust that you would not feel uncomfortable, because everything in my house that might disturb you in the slightest, myself included, is susceptible to disappearing. As far as a fee is concerned, whatever your answer might be to this project, it would be 7 or 8 lectures. I beg you not to doubt that I will defend your interests before anything else. I must apologize for having sent to Darmstadt a trifle, my book on the Divine Comedy. It was written, as everything I write, in order to learn, but it was sent to you in order to write the dedication. Thank you, and until soon, I hope. V.O. Buenos Aires, November 10th, 1927, 11 p.m. 3 letters. It's evident that if I had not lived through and suffered certain things, or, to be more precise, the lack of certain things, with a certain sharpness, I would not feel in this moment the joy of having 3 of your letters. The sun of your letters. Let me fall asleep in them, rest in them, and I will later bloom through them. Oh, how good it makes me feel, and how sweet. I love them so much. I would not know how to speak to you reasonably tonight. I have a headache, but I want to write to you because tomorrow there is Maritime Post. And also, I'm so close to you in this moment that your material presence, if it were suddenly possible, would do more than distract me from your profound existence within myself. And if you were here, I would not lift my eyes to your eyes, for fear of losing that you that is beneath my jealously closed eyelids. I am there, you write to me. It is you who is saying that to me. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it miraculous that these 3 words resting on my heart would comfort me more than a hand stretched out in the midst of a great danger? When I'm not able to resist the need to send you a telegraphic SOS, I am there will be your answer. That's what it's about. Being there, somewhere in the world. I don't really know how to address you. Dear friend repulses me as much as dear sir, and it's also false because it's just a fragment of the truth. I don't know if you had time to read the idiotic article that I sent you. This individual who makes vain attempts to seem spiritual writes somewhere alluding to my admiration for you, her Keyserling. Perhaps that is the first time that a possessive adjective has been placed correctly by this poor devil. Indeed, it's of my Keyserling that I speak, and it is to my Keyserling that I am writing now. In truth, this is the only name that I can, in all sincerity, give you. I don't know Keyserling. I only know my Keyserling. Don't allow yourself to be disheartened by that my. My means simply the sum total of everything that is yours, of everything that, inside me, bears your name, even if it is, in essence, myself. V. November 18th, 1927. I went to the offices of La Nation this afternoon. I wanted to find out what prices we pay. My dear Keyserling, I will take the liberty of acting in this matter, as my instinct and my desire to serve you, in the best sense of the word, will dictate. The friend I am speaking about told me that they will probably offer 250 pesos for each item. I seem to remember that we paid 300 pesos for Tagore's pieces. Another story. La Nación and Prensa, our 2 major newspapers, only publish and accept unpublished articles and are very strict about this. I'm sure we shouldn't run the risk of getting into trouble about this. La Nación would quickly find out that your articles have already appeared elsewhere, and I don't want this kind of fuss with this kind of people. The newspapers here aren't very generous. I'm sad, a little, tonight. It seems to me that you will never understand what you are to me. What I am for you is so different. V. Buenos Aires, July 18th, 1928. In which month do you plan to embark for South America? May? Peru, Uruguay, and Chile are countries that can be counted on in advance. I am already doing diligence in this regard. Brazil will not be difficult. But when would you go to Brazil? June, July, and August are the months in which you would not suffocate in that magnificent country. In your telegram, you do not mention Uruguay. However, in Montevideo, you could easily give some well-paid conferences. Anyway, I'll handle it. I think of you, literally, from morning to night. This concern already has something of a fixed idea, of mania, of madness, and I am looking forward to meeting so that I can think of something else. I say this half as a joke, half seriously. You don't think of me in this distant corner of America, living off your letters and your books, pending your wishes, pending your likes or dislikes, with no other aspiration than to serve and please. This is the work of enchantment, no more, no less. Buenos Aires, November 1928. My dear Keyserling, your last letter makes me a little angry. You ask me if I'm the kind of woman who never gives a clear answer except sometimes in a P.S. I don't know what kind of woman I am, and I was precisely depending on you to find out. What is absolutely certain is that there exist subjects that cannot be discussed in a letter, at a distance at which we find ourselves, you and I, at the present moment. I hate mundane life. and the mundane world as much as you do, and perhaps more. I don't go to Paris to wallow in these delights. I'm not at all interested in seeing you with others, as you suppose. It's with you that I want to talk. It's you I want to hear. Also, you should have noticed that that is all I do since June 1927. It's possible, and even probable, that I am an absurd person, and that my absurdity disgusts you. But it doesn't let me forget that you want to lodge at the Hôtel des Reservoirs in Versailles. I've already written and telegrammed to you that all this would be arranged upon my arrival in Paris. Your stay in Versailles is at my expense. If you wish to stay at the Hôtel des Reservoirs for more than 2 weeks, you will be welcome to it. I will come and see you every day and whenever you want. But it would be good that you know that I am, probably in more ways than one, perfectly unworthy of occupying all your time. In a word, as the moment of our meeting approaches, I feel an inferiority complex developing in me. I believe that I truly don't possess the necessary conditions for you to find my company interesting in large doses. And of course, this makes me suffer. If you write to me in a certain tone, if you write certain things, it's worse. Then I feel the wish to vanish from the surface of the earth. I haven't received an answer to my last telegram, and today I'll send another to have news of your health. V. 40 Rue d'Artois, Paris, January 2nd, 1929. My dear Keyserling, I trust that your rooms won't displease you too much. The furniture is uglyish, but I suppose that this kind of thing doesn't bother you. And furthermore, you have the whole view of Versailles Park coming through your bedroom window. Don't reproach me for being sad. It is true that I suffered terribly throughout the month that preceded my departure from Buenos Aires. But if you knew how happy I am to have come, to be here, if you only knew how grateful I am to you for having somehow torn me away from that corner, because without you and your terrible insistence, and how pig-headed you can be, I would not have left the American continent, at least not for the time being. I would have left it later, it was fated. Too late, perhaps. Thanks to you, I have gotten through a pain of which I was fearful. But I'm happy to have come, and I await you with joy. You are totally mistaken if you believe that my psychology differs from yours as regards to the epistolary effects of our relationship. I feel like writing to you now, as I did when I was in Buenos Aires. Why do you ask me not to be conventional? Are you not ready to take me as I am? I will not tell you if I am tall or petite, conventional or not. These are things that a man of your penetration should have guessed earlier. Furthermore, to be tall for you is harder than being tall for anyone else. You are a giant. And the same thing happens, I suppose, as regards conventions. Doubtlessly, I will be at your level. And above all, don't forget that I express myself with difficulty, that in this sense, I'm the contrary of you. I'm convinced that I will seem an idiot if you ask me any question. Until tomorrow, dear unknown. V. To Count Keyserling, upon his arrival, Hôtel des Reservoirs, 40 Rue d'Artois, Paris, January 3rd, 1929, 7 p.m. My dearest giant, news from you at last. But yes, I'll look after you and you won't have to worry about anything. You will have a car waiting for you at the station. A friend will lend it to me. I have explained to the chauffeur what you look like. He will recognize you amidst 1,000 faces because he knows you from photographs. I knew beforehand that you would not feel like meeting me upon getting off the train. I know you because I know myself. I've placed soap, eau de cologne, and flowers
in your apartment in the Hôtel des Reservoirs. Do you need anything else? Why do you say that I'm an extraordinary woman? Don't make fun of me or I'll go back to the American continent. You are right to suffer on my behalf. I also suffer, and more than you. But you would not like me to have a sobbing fit. After tomorrow at this time, what will you be thinking? And what will I be thinking? I'm much overcome by emotion. Don't make fun of me. Why do you make fun of me? On Sunday, you can make fun of me if you want, but not on Saturday. I'll be too intimidated by your presence. May God keep you. I feel as if I'm almost saying goodbye to you on this piece of paper, goodbye to the person you were to me, and who will stop being that person a few hours from now in Versailles. How will I manage without that Keyserling of mine made up by me? Good night, until tomorrow, V. Darmstadt, 25th November, 1929. Strictly confidential. My dear Dr. Jung, today I would like to inform you in the strictest confidence about a case which concerns in the first place another person, in the second place me, but in which I see at the same time a possible object of research of the first rank and possible task for you. I believe to be entitled to do so in all respects, since the person in question, originally at my instigation, will in all probability get in touch with you in the course of this winter, and if anyone, you can help her. But she must never know what I have told you. I am talking about Victoria Ocampo, who brought me to South America. She has long had the reputation in Europe to be the most important woman of that continent. She is now 39 years old, and is undoubtedly one of the strongest and strangest personalities in our era. In the summer of 1927, she suddenly fell in love with my work and literally leapt on me like a tiger. She wrote me daily letters of the highest spiritual and emotional beauty. But more and more, they became real love letters. More and more, the motive came to the fore that she had finally found the one who would understand her completely, love her completely, just as she is. And with wonderful perspicacity, she immediately recognized the one insertion point at which she could grasp me: my concern for material survival, or in my usual image, my fear of starvation. She was completely one with me, she would say. My work was her whole task, and she would take away all my worries of an uncertain future. Thus I, living predominantly a life of poetry, slowly weaved her into the poetry of my destiny. And even today, when everything is over, I can hardly imagine her as not belonging to me eternally. She swore to me that she would now do everything for me, and in particular took over the preparation of my entire South American trip. It was a novel in letters and telegrams as I have never heard of, more beautiful and intense than any fairy tale. But I felt uneasy about bursting into such a fairy tale in a foreign country, and so I let her, it's the correct word, come to Europe the previous winter so that we could get to know each other before the joint campaign in South America began. So we went a month together in France in January, February 1929. She lived in Paris, I in Versailles. But she was with me at least 12 hours a day. The personal encounter exceeded all my expectations. Victoria was not only highly spiritual, she was very beautiful, and in her role of Donna Umile, a humble woman, she developed in me an inspirational power such as I thought impossible. I was working all the time on my book, America Set Free, which I completed in Versailles. And if the chapters Predominant Women, Culture, and Spirituality are certainly among the best I created, it is to her credit. I felt as if I was living in a poem back then. Now, I was never in love in the usual sense. It was always clear to me that as a woman, she was not really my type, but her influence shook me so violently that I did not sleep a single night, and yet I was fresh and inspired to the highest degree, and above all, most of the hitherto buried or repressed emotional primal energies in me were set free. Later, all my friends found me rejuvenated by 10 years and completely relaxed inside. But the woman was at the same time, in an incomprehensible way, unhappy, even close to despair. She could never tell me what was happening inside her. She only cried uncontrollably, declared that she was living in hell. She gave me all the signs of love, except the last one, which I could have had at any time. But today, I thank all my guardian spirits that I did not force her. I saw a terrible conflict in her. the unresolvable conflict between pure spirituality and the wild nature of the tiger or serpent. I was well aware that the latter bound me, but that she at the same time suffered from it, and had come to me quite actually to be redeemed from it. Of course, I believe she wanted to be redeemed and tried to give her clarity, but her suffering became only bigger and bigger as I became happier and freer, even if inwardly more agitated. I left. We were to meet again in South America, where she wanted to return before me to prepare it. As soon as I left, the letters became strangely different from before. I was very worried and urged her to explain herself, that I was not a good guesser, that I could accept everything if she would only make me understand her. Always only reassuring letters. I should not worry, it was completely useless, it would only make her sick. And I found such letters at every station until the encounter in Buenos Aires. But when I arrived, I was suddenly confronted with a different person. No longer a donna umile in the least, but a violent queen of incredible strength and ruthlessness, sometimes a fury. Outwardly, she did everything for me. I was not allowed to do anything that she did not prepare, but inwardly, there was no longer any connection. The past was as if erased. This was the strongest shock of my life. It manifested itself, as always with me, above all, physically. In 1 month, I had more heart attacks, arrhythmia perpetua, than in the previous 48 years. For I could not give in. If I broke away from South America, which everything urged me to do, it would have been an irreparable fiasco of my work. And on the other hand, I could not expose her, for she had affixed herself to me with all the generosity of good nature. And in all of South America, we were more or less considered one, and all the world, beginning with her family, saw me that way. So I had to overcome myself as never before. That irritated her. She began to abuse me publicly. In private, she would never dare. I put up with it, smiling. And at the same time, I tried for a long time in vain to achieve a clarification. And finally, she explained to me that she had never really loved me, that she had only played in Versailles for fear of losing me, that we were incompatible, except spiritually, accusing herself that her basic trait was nothing but moral cowardice. I immediately addressed the situation, took all the blame, tried to refound our friendship in vain. And the more I tried, the more unpleasant she became, albeit with constant relapses into tenderness and continued possessiveness. One thing was clear to me. The turnaround meant the violent incursion of reality into 2 years of a dreamed-up life. Above all, I was really physically unsympathetic to her, no matter what the case had been earlier. Whatever the outward appearance may have been, in fact, no one, even Victoria, only to a small extent, noticed what was really going on inside me. I have never suffered anything even remotely similar. The continuing bond routed through the unconsciousness, the necessity to hang on for the sake of my work, at the same time to overcome myself again and again, for there were moments when I would have loved to knock this woman down publicly. Created for the 2 months that I spent in Buenos Aires a state of inner torment such as I would wish only on a few of my enemies. But I held out, and also forced, as I must admit often with statesman-like harshness, Victoria, who constantly, as a spoiled woman, wanted to break out to keep her commitments once made. But when I was finally able to travel to other countries and there gained the opportunity to reflect on my feelings, I realized that I had been so deeply hurt that I had to break for a time, precisely in order not to think badly of her all the time. I did this from Chile and asked her to allow me not to see her again on the return trip. She is said to have suffered terribly and admitted it to me in her farewell letter. This letter was, by the way, the first explanation of what had really happened inside her. No matter what the original truth was, this woman has little imagination, and only a few women can ever imagine that they felt differently than they did at a given point in time. She declared, in the bitterest, most hurting words possible, that I had always been as repugnant to her from the standpoint of sensibility as I was to her spirituality, that she had prostituted herself at the time out of love for my spirit and work, but that I had poisoned all her devotion, her admiration, her enthusiasm, etc., by my attitude toward her, which was simply that of the uncomplicated lover, on the one hand, and the poet, on the other, who sees his muse primarily as lover. She told me she was guilty only of one thing, to have been too cowardly to show me the truth from the beginning. I am deeply in this woman's debt, and therefore I want to do everything that I could to help her. In her debt, not because of the many external things she did for me, she made up for that abundantly by moral torment, but because, in the final effect, she has done only good to me, and at her moral expense. It is one of the strangest coincidences that could really make me believe in Christian providence, that the difficulty in South America has done me more good than all expected luck ever could have had. By some process of mysterious soul chemistry, which you will understand better than I do, the adversity has not embittered me, but as far as I can see, has finally freed me. Now, this is not imagination, but proven fact. Not only did I talk better than ever before, that is natural with a fighter nature like mine, but the energies rejected by the meant object became universal, objectless, free. For the first time in my life, I not only felt almost only positive myself, I triggered love in all others. Indeed, in whole peoples to an overwhelming degree. I was carried by an even higher and wider wave of sympathy. I was praised as a human being, as el grande enamorada de la vida, the great lover of life, as a person of pure and rich humanity. And this love, in turn, triggered in me a love for the entire South American continent, such as I feel for no other soil. Towards Victoria, I have today no shadow of a negative feeling. The moment I cut the thread, all bitterness in me ceased. I only think of her with deepest affection and have only one wish, to help her, which, unfortunately, I cannot do anymore. This is the point for the sake of which I am writing to you. I have to thank the woman, regardless of whatever I have gone through at times. But I fear that I have only harmed her, and the thought that it will remain so is unbearable to me. She is essentially good and generous, but her soul is completely unintegrated. There is no possibility of unification between the femme fatale, which she is to the highest degree, the refined sexual being, the ruler, and the servant of pure spirituality, with which alone she identifies. However, since she is 98% a powerful earth spirit, she is constantly disappointed by the fact that no one believes in the supremacy of the spiritual in her. Her condition only gets worse, since she suffers, like all South Americans, from an inflation of the ego in its passive modality. Finally, she is still ultimately shy, even to the point of cowardice. Her regal demeanor is, in part, overcompensation. The case is thus pathological in the deepest sense of the word. Surely she came to me to be redeemed, and I disappointed her. She always claimed that she and I are the same because she can't stand to love someone she doesn't identify with. But in truth, I am her exact opposite. And when I now hear that she wants to visit you, this is probably the same instinct. You can really help her. That's why I'm informing you here in advance as best I can. I beg you from the bottom of my heart to help her. It is worth it. She is really quite a good nature. Only she must not know how much you have learned through me. Surely she will blame me for everything. May she let off some steam. But perhaps, after a while, you can contribute to a conclusion where she does not remain my enemy and her certainly justified personal resentment no longer stands as her last word. For somehow, she remains just as attached to me as I remain to her. She will probably come to Europe in December, and I suppose she will write to you then. But perhaps she is already corresponding with you. Yours faithfully, Hermann Keyserling.
20th December, 1929. Dear Count, I still haven't heard anything from VO. It goes without saying that I will treat your letter as non-existent. Your excellent description of the fateful intermezzo with her clearly shows that it is an encounter with an earth woman, fraught with meaning. Concealed and revealed in it is one of the most beautiful animus anima stories I have ever heard. Unfortunately, poetic stories usually end in disappointment because when one meets one's soul, one never recognizes it but confuses it with the poor human creature who has functioned unconsciously as a symbol carrier. VO's longing for identification actually refers to the animus that she would like to possess in you, but she mixes it up with you personally and then, of course, is deeply disappointed. This lesson is a hellish torture for both, but extremely useful. The experience one would have wished for you, and assuredly the most fitting torture of all for VO, who is still possessed by her earth demons. Perhaps she prefers to be torn to pieces by the Titans, as happens to many such anima figures. Hence, you should always remember, with reverence and devotion, what has been revealed to you in the human shell of VO, so that your soul may remain inalienably with you, and your access to the earth may never be blocked. Let us hope the same for her, that besides tigers and serpents and eternal spirit, there is still a human being in her who can remember with gratitude the revelation of her own spirit in you. But it is only too easy to make a personal tragedy out of what was ultimately a divine comedy, and then a spark of eternal fire hisses out in a puddle. With best regards, ever sincerely yours, C.G. Jung.
Formentor, 31st March, 1931. My dear doctor, you surely do not have a lot of time to write, but since I don't know when I will see you again, I would like to ask you something. I would like to know whether you are familiar with the wish to die. If I am healthy, I always think of death, full of fear. The thought of the cessation of my radiant life force is dreadful to me. I have been in this state for several months now, and I would welcome a brother in death. Meanwhile, I do not believe that I am really already at the end. I look very well, and what I have achieved in overcoming illness during the last week proves that I still have great strength. On the other hand, I have not had any dreams of death or execution for a long time. Everything takes place in my daytime consciousness, which is probably a worrying sign considering my nature. There is only one thing that depresses me, that I have not been able to write for more than a year. Count Hardenberg insists that Victoria Ocampo must have poisoned, or rather bewitched me. The experience must have given me a deep shock, although I feel little of it directly. Certainly, I am no longer the same. If you can think of something to say about all this, please write to me. Hermann Keyserling.
23rd April, 1931. Dear Count, from your description, I have the impression that your South American experience, especially the encounter with VO, has constellated contents in your unconscious that are the source of continued disturbances. For better or worse, we must, in collaboration with the South American Earth, take VO as the anima, who, like South America, stands for the whole unconscious. The unconscious has a different rhythm from consciousness and different goals. Until now, you have been accustomed by means of intuition and literary work to subordinate everything the psyche offered you to the aims of your conscious mind, or to create out of it a conscious view of the world. You have made South America out of VO. Now it is a question of expressing those contents which can be located neither in VO nor in South America, and which seem to you still completely unknown, not by molding them into a picture of the external world or incorporating them into such a picture, but on the contrary, by subordinating your philosophical skill and descriptive powers to those unknown contents. Then those contents will be able to mold an inner picture of the world without your guidance or intention. The initial question to be directed to the invisible world would be, who or what has come alive in South America? Who or what has entered my psychic life and created disturbances and wants to be heard? To this you should add, let it speak. Then switch off your noisy consciousness and listen quietly inwards and look at the images that appear before your inner eye, or hearken to the words that the muscles of your speech apparatus are trying to form. Write down what then comes, without criticism. Images should be drawn or painted assiduously, no matter whether you can do it or not. Once you have got at least fragments of these contents, then you may meditate on them afterwards. Don't criticize anything away. If any questions arise, put them to the unconscious again the next day. Don't be content with your own explanations, no matter how intelligent they are. Remember that your health is seriously at stake, and that the unconscious has an unknown and far-reaching control over it. Treat any drawings the same way. Meditate on them afterwards, and every day go on developing what is unsatisfactory about them. The important thing is to let the unconscious take the lead. You must always be convinced that you have mere after-knowledge and nothing else. In this case, the unconscious really does know better. Forgive me for delaying my answer so long. With best wishes, yours sincerely, C.G. Jung. 13th of August, 1931. Dear Count, first I must ask you to forgive me for not reacting earlier to your interesting manuscript, South American Meditations. It is rich and significant in content. You are inaugurating a new and contemporary style of sentimental journey, though it is considerably bloodier than its predecessors. South America has also brought you face to face, plainly and honestly, with the dark underworld, the chthonic unconscious. It is a classic case of the collective unconscious being constellated by the activation of the inferior function, which, because of its contamination with the contents of the collective unconscious, always drags this up with it. Simultaneously, the anima emerges in exemplary fashion from the primeval slime, laden with all the pulpy and monstrous appendages of the deep. And outside, conjured up by her appearance inside, Victoria Ocampo is forced into your magic circle, a meaningful adventure whose continuation arouses my curiosity. That was an encounter with the demonism of the earth, and it has never yet been described better. I wish you all the luck with the continuation, but I would advise you to cut down on cultural speculation as much as possible. Otherwise, you will blur what is most impressive about your work. That is, the personal experience, with its exemplary subjectivity. I hope you are all right in health. With best regards, yours sincerely, C.G. Jung.
SS Cap Arcona, Atlantic Ocean, June 12th, 1934. Dear Dr. Jung, since my friend Ortega y Gasset published The Psychology of the Unconscious, and since I read the English translation of Psychological Types, I have been wanting to meet you, to know you. Your books have been a great help to me. I admire them, and I am grateful to them, to you, for all I have found in them. I feel I owe you half of my actual serenity, perhaps more than half, and I shall always be indebted to you for it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this serenity is neither complete nor continuous, but I suppose few human beings know such uninterrupted and unimpaired bliss. Few, or none. We will talk about that when we meet, because I hope we will meet soon. I am South American, Argentine. We have common friends, I believe, and maybe you heard my name, maybe not. I'm quite certain you never saw my review, Sur. South America is so terribly far from you Europeans, though we Americans are so terribly near and suffer so much of the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean is like a mental disease in some of us. Distance. Exile. We are always exiled. Exiled in America. Exiled in Europe. We can't do without Europe, but neither can we do without America. We stifle in America, and we stifle for other reasons in Europe. Perhaps sometime, something will be born of it. In the meantime, our anguish is intense. I am reading now Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I should very much like to have that book translated too. Before I started reading it, I wrote an article for La Nación, Buenos Aires, on Huxley's last book, Beyond the Bay of Mexique. I should like you to read that article, if you have some spare time, because it will help you to understand how deeply moved I must have been by Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and how I must treasure those pages. You don't read Spanish, I suppose. Can I send you my article in French? Can I write to you in French? I don't feel quite at home in English, but I do in French. Are you staying in Zurich for a while? Where shall I go to see you? Where will it be more convenient to you, and when? If some lectures could be arranged for you in Argentina next year, would you feel tempted? Please let me have an answer as quick as possible, because all my other plans will wait till this most important business of having a talk with you is fixed. Can you, will you arrange it? Anyhow, I thank you for all you have already given to me. Victoria Ocampo.
June 26, 1934. Dear Madam, unfortunately I don't read Spanish, but you can write to me in French just as well if you don't like English. If you want to meet me, it ought to be in Zurich, because next week I shall begin my vacations, which I usually spend not altogether too far from Zurich. Not knowing your program, I don't know when an interview would suit you. I could see you in July, but I should prefer it to be between the 1st and 18th of August. As far as the 13th of July, I'm coming down every Friday to my place at the above address, which is a sort of suburb of Zurich. Thus, I could see you on any of those Fridays if you let me know in time, i.e. about a week ahead. I can't say that I feel particularly tempted to lecture in Argentina, because as a whole I don't like lecturing. There's too much talk in the world anyhow. I've been surprised by your remark that Ortega y Gasset has published The Psychology of the Unconscious. I had no idea that he had a hand in it. It's nice to know that what one has written has meant something to somebody. Sincerely yours, C.G. Jung.
27 Avenue Malakoff, Paris, 28th of June, 1934. Dear Dr. Jung, of course there is too much talk in the world, but your kind of talk is not quite the same as everyone else's, I believe. Sorry, you are not tempted. I shall try to go to Zurich in August, as you prefer it. Yes, your books have meant and mean very much to me. Sincerely yours, Victoria Ocampo. In October of 1934, I took a small detour as I was returning from Rome to Paris. I stopped in Zurich to meet the author of Psychological Types. It was pouring with rain that afternoon when my taxi crossed in Kusnacht, a garden that smelt of wet earth, and left me armed with an umbrella and disarmed by contradictory emotions in front of the door of Dr. Jung. Was it because of the long train ride, the sudden change in weather, the rain, the proximity to a great man? I don't know. I felt growing and spreading in me one of those inferiority complexes that makes us feel and wonderfully perform the role of an idiot. Under these sorry conditions, I, my umbrella, and my emotions entered the house of the famous Swiss psychiatrist. But my umbrella, whose luck I envied at the moment, remained in the hall, while we, my emotions and I, were forced to climb the stairs. We were asked to wait in a small room lined with books. That wait was providential. On the shelf, I suddenly saw, lined up in a tight row, a regiment of detective novels. The arrival of the dove with the olive branch must not have produced in the heart of Noah a greater joy than this discovery produced in mine. It announced land. Homo sum, I thought. In the house of Dr. Jung, he or his family read these solidly silly stories that were also read in mine, that you also read, and that are as relaxing as a yawn. Instantly, I recovered my poise. Utterly reassured, I entered Dr. Jung's study a few minutes later. Immediately, I realized that he is tall, very tall. But curiously, my eyes that I raise up to him don't recognize in that face more than an expression of power, or of an intelligence in which it is bathed, an intelligence that advances toward me like an enormous elephant, hiding all the rest. An elephantine intelligence. I have the impression that that colossal intelligence that sees everything does not see me. I have the impression that it will step on me and squash me. Instinctively, I feel that I should step out of its way and throw things at it. It grabs them, one by one, delicately, with that incredible ability of elephants, whether to rip up a tree trunk or pick up a lump of sugar. And in this way, we talk. But suddenly he tells me something that I am still pondering, and which I believe from that interview is the observation worth repeating. When I asked him, would he not like to give lectures in Argentina, he answered, "What for?" They would not interest anyone. The audience would not understand. Because they are Latinos? Because they are Catholic? I would have wanted at that point that he give a long explanatory lecture on the subject, but his clients were waiting for him with who knows what heavy load of complexes. Jung accompanied me to the entrance hall, in which I took again my umbrella, no longer envied. His 2 dogs did not want to leave him, and stumbling over them, we went down the stairs together. One of the dogs was jumping around, the other, taciturn, moved unwillingly. Extroverted the one, introverted the other, my host said, laughing. I did not need to ask which was which. Hotel Lac, Zurich, the 16th of October, 1934. Dr. Jung, I leave Zurich, where I came especially to see you, with the bitter regret that I could not really speak with you as I would have liked. I needed very much to do so, but since you had no time to spare, I won't insist. Just imagine that I had almost given up coming to see you because of your letter. That letter was like a bucket of cold water. I had, thanks to that letter, the impression that you, who understand everything, at least everything that in my opinion is essential in life, had not understood the tone of my letter. That is to say, the degree to which I was sincere, and the degree to which your books meant something deeply important in my life. It would be necessary, Dr. Jung, for me to go and consult you as a sick person without really being sick. Indeed, my moral sickness consists in being tormented by a variety of attitudes that are in appearance contradictory. You could help me see more clearly, and I believe that only by speaking with you, this miracle would come into effect, and I would be as grateful to you as if you had cured me of a torment, a physical ailment. If you could only classify me in the same way you classify your dogs, that would amount to the same thing as winning a battle against the enemy. What do you think of this? For my part, I believe that, at this moment, you are the only person who can help and be effective for me. As I familiarize myself with your thinking, and I apologize if I appear presumptuous, it seems to me that I'll arrive at a relative peace of mind. This would allow me to work better than I do now, and especially to disperse myself less. As far as I'm concerned, that's the situation. As for your letters in Argentina, I want to repeat that this trip might be of some interest to you and would be enormously interesting to us. I'm leaving Zurich this evening. If I don't call you, it's because I've nothing more to say. When you have time for a client who wishes to consult you, you'll let me know, with fondest memories and with the assurance of my sincere admiration. Victoria Ocampo.
October 25th, 1934. Dear Madam, you will find here the preface for the Spanish edition of Psychological Types. I very much regretted on telephoning you the other day not to find you at your hotel, and I would like to re-thank you again for your efforts. I would be obliged if you would also convey my thanks to Monsieur de la Serna for his translation. Yours faithfully, C.G. Jung.
Dear Marco, I've read your colloquium on Victoria with great interest. All in all, your judgment is sound, but perhaps I can render you a service if I complete somewhat your dialogue. I believe that there does not exist in this moment of history a more evocative woman than Victoria. She is not inspiring, she can't be that because she is too self-absorbed, but there is no doubt that this woman has evoked more without the majority of her objects being aware of it than almost all of the women that are spoken of. And that is because Victoria is the most powerfully telluric woman alive, because what matters in her is the telluric root that looks or pulls towards the earth. And that is also true of her very keen intelligence. Her spontaneity, also genuine, is in service of her tellurism. I believe that it is precisely for that reason that she has evoked in others so many spiritual forces. I don't believe there exists a single man of genius who has heard her and is not indebted to her in this sense. Without her, I would never have found the truths and visions that result in South American meditations. Without her, I would neither have been able to write Of the Art of Life, because Victoria, contrary to what you say, is the one who least masters this art. When all is said and done, she is a grande gâcheuse, a killjoy, as are all independent women with great telluric force. Without her, I would not have arrived to the final synthesis of myself. I believe that this fact alone is more important than everything that Victoria has written and expressed in Argentina. But this concerns not only myself. Ortega also owes much to her, and many, many others. Few realize this, and it is possible that Victoria herself does not know this, or does not want to admit it, because this influence has nothing to do with her conscious aspirations and whatever can satisfy her superficial vanity. But there is no doubt that in this, and in nothing else, lies Victoria Ocampo's immortal value. Herman von Keyserling.
March 17th, 1943. Mar del Plata, San Martin, 689, Buenos Aires. Dear Dr. Jung, I don't know if you still remember my visit on a very rainy day 10 years ago. Through me, your psychological types was translated in Spanish. I should very much like to publish in my review, Sur, a monthly magazine, something lately written by you, and if possible, written for us. Will you please let me know if you get this letter? Letters travel with some difficulty nowadays. Yours sincerely, Victoria Ocampo.
Kusnacht, Zurich, July 3rd, 1943. Dear Mrs. Ocampo, your letter of March 17th reached me a few days ago. I certainly remember your visit to Zurich and your proposition to get my book about types published. I should like to live up to your expectations as to have an article of my pen for your magazine. Unfortunately, we have to be content if letters get through in these times. I'm afraid that it would be absolutely useless to try to send manuscripts. Hoping you are always in good health, I remain yours sincerely, C.G. Jung.
A traveler and one of his shadows. In March 1950, several years after Keyserling's death, I received a very intelligent and friendly letter from his wife, letting me know that an entire chapter of his memoirs, for which the title of Travel Through Time had been definitively adopted, carried my name. Countess Keyserling hoped that I would not feel disappointed or hurt by the contents of the letter. Knowing Keyserling, his boundless imagination, and his impetuous way of collecting facts, which he boasted of despising as mere, I began to feel uneasy. That is why I find myself in this moment writing on a subject that I would not have considered in the way in which I will do so if the chapter in question did not oblige me. Here are a few facts. Towards 1927, I read with passion the travel diary of a philosopher and world in the making. I immediately thought of inviting him to lecture in Buenos Aires, in all of South America, if necessary. My correspondence with Keyserling began in these circumstances. The first letters concerned the conditions of his tour, the subjects to discuss, etc. I offered to put up in the house that I was building the Darmstadt philosopher and his wife. He complained about the insecurity of his material life from a financial point of view, and I told him that my house would always be at his disposal. Ever since my childhood, I have been a great letter writer. I always had affection for this sort of expansiveness, and the opportunity Keyserling was offering me to give free rein to my unpunished vice was marvelous. To write to someone we admire and whom we don't even know. What bliss. My epistolary self bolted like a colt. To be able to converse daily through these small signs scribbled by my hand. To receive pages covered with those small signs from someone whom one considers a genius. While I complained about the indecipherability of his handwriting, he criticized me for my clear handwriting that he found lamentably conventional. But did he really read my letters, or did he examine them almost unconsciously, as one looks at the ink blots of a Rorschach? And when he imagined that he was analyzing the ink blot that I was for him, was he not doing what subjects taking the Rorschach test do? Projecting themselves? What cannot be read into the letters of an unknown woman, a devout reader, a woman from another continent? You should come to Europe, Keyserling started to write to me. And then it's necessary that you come to Europe so we can discuss the tour, so that you can teach me to speak Spanish, so that we can get to know one another. And soon afterwards, it's indispensable that you come. This coincided with my burning desire to return to the old world. But in spite of my dream of meeting Keyserling at last, I began to feel in the pit of my stomach, faced with the simple idea of the meeting, the unease we feel the day before an exam, or before visiting the doctor whose diagnosis troubles us. The date was set, January 1929. The place, Versailles. I was living in an apartment in Paris. Keyserling, invited by me, because I did not want to go to see him in Germany, set up in the Hotel des Reservoirs. Spiritual supremacy in the masculine realm, as if the spirit had a sexual identity outside the field of grammar, and the fact that man bestows upon himself the title of representative of the spirit, with the simple pretext that he is, in the species, the carrier of spermatozoids, has always seemed to me comic in certain aspects and tragic in others. I have never admitted that man, as carrier of spermatozoids, is the representative of the Holy Spirit on earth, while woman, as carrier of ovules, is the representative of telluric forces. I repeat, I believe that, on the contrary, if men have seen woman as the representative of telluric forces, it is due to the phenomena of projection. The reaction caused in them by the woman as woman made them attribute to her the impressions they felt regarding her. Because woman made them telluric, they proclaimed her telluric. Because woman awakened in them their emotivity, they proclaimed her emotional. Because woman's proximity acted on certain of their glands, they proclaimed her animal. And finally, and mainly, because they sought consciously or unconsciously to find in the company of woman thrills of a sexual nature, most of the time they left the spirit in the closet like an unnecessary umbrella and ended up believing that they were the true representatives of the spirit that naturally they did not find in woman because they lacked the organ to perceive it, that particular organ having remained in the closet. All these thoughts came to me, of course, much later, and not at the moment in which, seeing Keyserling for the first time in the Hotel des Reservoirs, I summed up in two famous names, Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, the image that the Baltic giant evoked for me. I immediately saw that big clouds were gathering on the horizon and that they would not all be rose-colored, but I thought a sky full of gray clouds, like the ones El Greco painted when depicting Toledo, can also be very beautiful. Furthermore, these muddled feelings did nothing but pass through me like lightning flashes, precursors to a new lucidity. We had dinner together that night. I felt very intimidated, very tongue-tied with him, but when I left the Hotel des Reservoirs that night, I knew as little of the impression I had made on him as that which he had made on me. And this quid pro quo was to prolong itself as in a classical vaudeville. On his side, Keyserling, like almost all richly endowed thinkers, was in a certain sense deaf to his fellow humans when he became obsessed with an idea. My thoughts, my true feelings were not perceived, but interpreted by him according to his poetic fantasy. Of what precisely did this misunderstanding consist? The extraordinary fervor of my enthusiasm for certain aspects of the Keyserlingian genius had led him to believe that this enthusiasm was inseparable, unless medieval splitting occurred, from a great, all-encompassing love that never inspired me. he was always the man of genius, the brilliant conversationalist, as all those who knew him well remember. But those who knew him as a guest will equally remember his demands and fits of violence. And in Versailles, he was my guest. Consequently, my duty was to remedy everything that, in his view, wasn't working at the Hotel des Reservoirs. I've seen him grow pale with fury over a dish of mashed potatoes. And though violence occupies a place in my own list of sins, I was frightened by the magnitude of his. He made use of the size of his giant's body. Even though he did not address me but the waiter, I suspected that I was the real recipient, and that the waiter and the mashed potatoes were pretexts to alleviate the tension. As the weeks went by, my reserve of meekness was becoming depleted in my visits to Versailles. Keyserling remained deaf and blind to my hints and my wild colt-like bolting. Little by little, I began to be convinced that sooner or later, I would have to end with kicking. I could have invented a pretext after the experience of Versailles, regrettable from my personal point of view, to cancel the lecture tour. But the thought did not cross my mind of sacrificing for the sake of my personal reactions a matter totally unrelated to them. The spectacle of Keyserling as a man of considerable size seemed to me always worthy of interest and admiration. I was certain of his success, and as long as people kept their distance and took the philosopher in reasonable doses, there was no reason to fear a mishap. My relationship with his daily person, with his reactions to the spirit with capital S, and with the mashed potatoes in lowercase, had taught me much about the limits of my endurance. I felt that at times he saw me as a recalcitrant potato that would not allow itself to be mashed. I changed nothing as far as the lecture tour was concerned, but I decided, 1, not to return to Buenos Aires on the same ship as he. 2, to lodge Keyserling at the Plaza Hotel and not in my house. 3, not to employ with him, since he wasn't a primitive like we were, those euphemisms, that female diplomacy that I had thought myself obliged to use in Versailles when he required a creative spiritual state that my coarseness might disturb. My frankness was treated as treason and my bucking as a poisoned arrow. In a word, after the arrival of the philosopher in Buenos Aires, our relationship became more and more tense, until the moment in which I learned by chance Keyserling's opinion of my behavior towards him. I felt as if splashed with acid by such injustice, and I wrote him a letter, he was on the point of departure, in which I explained to him with red-hot frankness what I thought and felt, what I had thought and felt since Versailles. Later, he told me that this was the cruelest letter he had received in all his life. I asked him then to return the tons of scribbles that I had sent him in exchange for his letters. I sent him a huge parcel of papers. I burned those he returned, except a few. It was also a symbolic burial that I performed as an auto-da-fe. Revolted for a time by the role of secretary-hostess, I founded the literary review Sur a year after the settling of these accounts. I saw in Sur better possibilities to establish relationships with writers and to help them make their works known. In 1932, South American Meditations appeared, bringing me with their pages a new wave of indignation. I did not want to write about Keyserling. I only enjoy analyzing what I can praise, and the Meditations didn't seem to me worthy of praise. In that book of 350 pages, except for a few moments of wisdom, I felt repulsed by a frantic generalizing of capricious conclusions. I recognized opinions and observations with which I had entrusted the philosopher, but distorted by I don't know what phenomenon of extraordinary inflation, an interpretative elephantitis. Like people with a strong musical memory who are too lazy to read the score, he analyzed the countries of South America by ear. And the ear, however faithful it might be, cannot always reproduce complicated counterpoints in their integrity. Reading the Meditations renewed my sense of distance. Then in 1939, in a letter Keyserling wrote, speaking about the schizophrenic splitting between the made-up ideal and reality that had skewed my vision of his personality in Versailles. Eventually, Keyserling renounced his project to convince me of my schizophrenic splitting and put his resolution in these words: "Let's agree to differ." As far as the lady was concerned, who could no longer hear the word telluric without pulling out her gun, after having written her final truth to the philosopher, she felt a great relief. She attributed much value, no doubt because of her feeble imagination, to intellectual honesty. I have spent all my life peering out of books. I don't regret it, in spite of the disappointments that the cult of authors provoked in me. I also got to know, through it, great joys. I owe one of these joys to reading Keyserling, and I will not abjure it. Neither will I abjure my meeting or my clash with him. It was a learning experience, and I no longer regret having been through it. Countess Keyserling, entirely dedicated to the memory of her husband and to the publication of his posthumous works, wrote an answer to a letter in which I pointed out to her that Keyserling distorted certain facts in the chapter on VO. She wrote, "I understand the impression that must be produced, reading something in which one is treated as a myth. I suppose one would require a superhuman indifference to bear seeing oneself used as a symbol, as myth, and not as a simple human being. It seems to me that you have not entered completely into the spirit in which the book, and especially the chapter, were written, if you insist on facts. But of course I understand very well that it must be disconcerting to read one's name and to be in life and mythology at one and the same time. I can assure you that all those here who have read the chapter and know nothing about you think it's one of the best." There, she put her finger into the wound. That can only be thought by leaving me completely aside. Countess Keyserling, whom I have never met, is an intelligent woman skilled in the art of diplomacy. She knows how to defend her husband's cause. But that he diagnosed in me a medieval splitting, a case of schizophrenic cleaving, because I did not accept and admire him totally, is carrying poetic fantasy too far. I believe that only one person was capable of playing the necessary role of Orpheus in the tumultuous life of Keyserling, his wife. I take my hat off to her, because it requires heroism to live next to the crater of a volcano. Travel through time is a sort of general confession. That is its main attraction. But it is not enough to render a confession public in order to guarantee its authenticity. Frequently, the contrary happens. Keyserling expects that the myth of his life lived will be felt by many as a vicarious auto-revelation. Yes, there might be much to learn in it, but much to unlearn as well. I have always had difficulty admitting that prudence might be a virtue. However, if imprudence is a vice, then prudence must be a virtue. It is thanks to Keyserling that I have thought about this. Had I not been imprudent with him, and my imprudence consisted in having deified him a lot, but not having turned him into a god, I see a difference in this. He would not have had the pretext to behave towards me like an Olympian god. He would not have had occasion to place me on a pedestal and then take me off it because I wouldn't meekly play the part of the mortal woman, submitting to his poetic fantasy. So be it. I think I will never learn prudence. When South American meditations appeared, I resolved to remain silent, in spite of the continuous, transparent, and distorting allusions I saw there. My name was not mentioned. It is no doubt healthy that the VO chapter in his memoirs has now forced me to break my silence. How strange. Writing about Keyserling reconciles me with his shade, as in a dialogue beyond the grave. Great Baltic man, Let's agree to differ and forgive this indomitable mortal woman as she forgives you. 1951, Victoria Ocampo.